Welcome to Therapy Unplugged, the podcast where two therapists offer insights to the real-life issues we all experience. We are your hosts, Sarah Benoit and Megan McCullough.
Hello and welcome back, listeners. It's Megan here and Sarah. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm well. How about yourself?
I am doing really well too. And so for today's episode, we are going to be talking about this idea of something I think, Sarah, that you and I are going to, for today's episode, we're going to call toxic productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why this episode topic even came about is because several weeks ago, when we were preparing for our episode on perfectionism, I decided to reread Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection. And it's a book that I had read a long time ago. I loved it. I resonated with it. I've certainly recommended it to clients, but I myself hadn't really gone back and reread it for a very long time. So when I got to the section on what she calls her guideposts to wholehearted living, which is what she sees almost as the opposite of perfectionistic, living. One of the guideposts really stood out to me, and it was guidepost number 7. And she labeled it letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just really resonated with me. And as soon as I read that, I remember thinking, ooh, I want to ask Sarah if she wants to delve into this further. And I think I feel that way for a lot of reasons. I've just, in my private practice, I've come across so many clients, but also people in my life personally. And I'm sure to a degree, I've experienced it as well, where we wear this idea of busyness and we wear this idea of just constantly doing and checking things off our to-do list as like a badge of honor, right? And I'll stop here and just say that we are in no way dissing this idea of setting goals and completing goals, right? Like if you think about it, there's no way our podcast would have gotten off the ground if we weren't two productive people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair to say, right?
Yes.
So we really want to talk about the difference between like a healthy productivity and toxic productivity. And the way that I would define toxic productivity is that it is the drive to do, to produce, to always be on the go with no or little balancing that out with our needs for rest, for play, for fun, right? So it's really, in my mind anyway, it's about that imbalance. And I think it can often occur when we tie our self-worth to our net worth, which in today's society, right, that's a pretty common thing that we do. So that's at least the general gist, I think, of what I'm hoping, where this podcast can go. Do you have anything to add about that?
I think, a few things. I think in terms of how you define it, I think you really do a good job of nailing that down. And I do want to kind of support, I think there's a very fine line between kind of healthy productivity and this idea of toxic productivity. And I also think it really ties into, I mean, if you were to dig deeper, it ties into some of the things we've talked about in the past, whether it's the perfectionism or, um, almost even the overwhelm in terms of, I think that's one of the things it can lead to. And it was interesting as you were talking because one of the things that I did yesterday was I threw a clip up on YouTube,
Mm,
um, around ironically, it was around this topic because I had 2 hours in between sessions, and I was like, "Okay, how do I make the most
mhm,
use of this time?" Right? And how do I challenge, I mean, I was torn because I wanted to challenge myself and push myself out. I'm not necessarily comfortable throwing stuff like this out, in social media,
mhm,
and that's one of the things I'm trying to do is sit with that and move past it. And it was so interesting because I was so not productive. I spun out. I sat there and I was like, What am I doing?" I totally overanalyzed, and I mean, if listeners, if you go and watch it, I mean, you'll see I kinda it's 3 minutes, but I walk through, okay, like, I gotta stop. Like,
mhm, mhm,
I need to practice what I preach,
mhm.
and it's but my point is that it's very easy to cross that line.
Yes.
And I think it depends. I think there's a lot that goes into that as to some of, like, the contributing factors, right? I mean, I can use myself as an example. I'll never forget, I when I graduated college, I went to Hawaii with my mom, and we were walking, I think we were in Lahaina, and we're walking, and she looks at me, she's like, "Do you ever stop?" She's
Mm.
like, "Can you just stop?" Now, mind you, I'm, like, 22 years old. I'm like, "Mom, I'm fine." But here we are in this beautiful place, and I'm all about, like, "What are we doing next? What are we doing next?" And my mom's like, "How about if we just sit by the pool and read?"
Mhm,
And so part of that, I think it's very interesting because there's so many things that do contribute to, you know, how productive someone is, but then crossing that line. And I think
yeah.
you brought up something that was really important, which is a lot of people tie it to that word you use, net worth.
Mhm,
So whether that's, um, maybe it's their self-esteem and they feel they have something to prove, and if they're constantly busy, then, they're like a superhero, and people are gonna look up to them. I think certainly in this country, if you look at other cultures, they take months off in the summer, and or they take, like a 2-hour lunch.
right. Or even a nap time.
Yes,
Mhm,
right? So I
mhm.
think there's a lot that goes into that.
Yes, it's all really, really good points, and thank you for also sharing the story about being in Hawaii, and, one thing that that brought up for me, when you were mentioning how this can be a slippery slope or there's a fine line between healthy productivity and then when productivity kind of turns into something that can cause some sort of detriment.
Mhm,
Um, Maybe one thing also that's important to point out, and I hadn't really thought about this, but I don't think that one day you are just in the realm of healthy productivity and checking off your to-do list and accomplishing your goals and feeling good about it, and then the next day, you're just suddenly not able to do that anymore, and it's gone into this darker place. It
mhm.
almost feels more right, so I don't think it's linear, I think it's like we weave in and out, and I'm realizing this as we're talking that that's definitely probably for me the case where maybe I weave in and out. I think I've gotten pretty good just because self-care and self-discipline is so important to me and
Mhm,
having healthy habits, but I'm by no way saying I'm perfect at this, and I think that, some weeks or some days are better than others,
mhm.
and so, yeah, this is just it's this kinda gray area, right, that we're talking about.
And I think that's a really good point because I think and I'm guessing, and maybe for you, but in general, I think that weaving in and out probably also has to do with a certain level of self-awareness.
Mm,
And, I think that's one of the things that happens too, or even if maybe someone has an awareness that, "Ooh, I am on this slippery slope," but they may not know, or, they may not know how to stop that or slow it down, or they might feel they can't, that
right,
it's not okay.
absolutely, yes. Do you wanna talk a little bit about, I mean, I guess we already are in a sense, but are there other ideas or things you wanna say about how we get to this place? Like, how does this idea of toxic productivity happen? And I'm sure there's a lot of different factors. Yeah.
Right. I think a couple of the ones that really stand out for me is again, and some of this is really individual. I think there could be for some people, there is this level of competition. And that competition could be within themselves. It could be, maybe with a classmate or a
Mm,
coworker or, even within families. And excuse me, I think there's the two that kind of I don't wanna say they scare me, but I think it's one of those things that awareness is very important, is when we think of technology,
yeah.
because we are getting bombarded. I mean, we have access to everything all the time. So and especially and I'm not saying all social media is bad,
Mhm,
because we all use it, but I think that can be a slippery slope for people because they look and say, "Oh my gosh, look at this family. They went to,
mhm,
Spain for a week, and, well, I've gotta compete with that, which means I've gotta work harder so I can afford my Spain trip, or I can do an even better trip." And, you know, or this person's on 15 different boards. Well, I better get myself on
mhm,
some boards, because maybe I'm not feeling like I'm up to par in that circle, or, does that mean, again, to that net worth idea,
mhm.
am I working hard enough?
Right.
And I think the other part of this is that's important, and I don't wanna spend a ton of time on it because it really could be its own deep dive.
Mhm,
But I do believe that this idea of toxic productivity, not intentionally, mind you, but
mhm,
can be very addicting.
mhm.
And the reason is that every time we accomplish something, we get a dopamine hit.
Right, right.
And the more we do that, we then also develop a tolerance. And so we need more. And we do more then.
Yes.
And if we don't have those hits, that's where I think, okay, well, now how are you feeling? Maybe you're feeling depressed. Maybe you're feeling, just even lethargic, like, bored. Like, okay, well, I got to go
Mhm.
do something and I think
Yeah.
that might be the one that people don't necessarily pay attention to until
Mhm,
it's too late. And they maybe don't even know how to name it.
mhm. No, I love that. I'm so glad that you brought that up, and this idea of producing, being busy in certain ways, checking off that to-do list gives us the dopamine rush, and you know what it made me think of? If we go back to this idea of balancing, how do we balance that out? Um, I'm just kind of going out on a limb here. This might not be true
Mhm,
for everybody, but maybe the that balancing act, like, so let's say you decide in the middle of the day, your very busy day, like, "Oh, man, I just gotta get outside in the sun for 10 minutes, and I'm just gonna go for a very kinda, like, gentle walk." That I'm wondering now, like, that probably even though it's so necessary and good for you, it might not give you that kind of addictive dopamine hit that you're thinking
Mm,
that subconsciously you're needing. Now, I absolutely think it uplifts you, don't get me wrong, but in today's society, right, like, that that 10-minute walk isn't necessarily seen as something productive or exciting in the least, right?
right.
So that may play into, why and how we've become so imbalanced.
Yes, yes. Well, and I think it's interesting. I mean, and I think this isn't maybe an example. I remember, and this was in my 20s. So when I was working, um, I rarely took lunch. I mean, and
Mhm,
I've always been that way. Like I do
mhm,
better if I keep going
mhm,
because like when I stop, I'm like, oh, good, I'm done.
mm, okay, yeah,
But what I used to do is and I did this with a bunch of the people I worked with, is I would run at lunch. So there were a couple of us that would go out and run. But the idea still, and I hated running. And I ran races. I hated it, but I did it.
mhm,
And there was part of that mentality was like, well, I could justify taking lunch because I was still doing something. And but here I am doing something I didn't like. And I was competitive about it. I
mhm,
was competitive with myself, like, "Okay, I've gotta get my time better or
yeah,
my distance longer." And I could somehow like, it wasn't that gentle walk. It was, there's a goal attached to this
yeah.
activity. And honestly, at that if you had asked me in any of those moments, if you had even asked me 10 years later, I would not have the answer that I'm having now. I would be like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, I went to run at lunch, so what?"
Right, that is such a good example of that fine line you were talking about in the beginning,
Mhm.
because you could justify it to yourself, "Oh, I'm taking care of myself. I'm exercising. I'm stopping working. I'm running during
Right.
lunch." But in for you personally, that it was not in the category of the balancing the balancing it out. It was not in the category. I wouldn't even put that in the category of self-care, and some people
Right?
may argue that, but if you're not enjoying it and you're right, and it's like one more thing you're pushing yourself to do, that also is, in my opinion, would be in the category of the toxic productivity. So, yeah, that's a really good example.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I know when I meet with clients that this is bleeding into their lives, I will ask them to kinda take a moment and drill down and, ask them, and I know we're gonna get into this a little bit later, but, "Okay, are you getting joy from this?" Because
Exactly.
I think to your point, there are people out there that would disagree and say, "Well, this is a form of self-care." Maybe, but
Mhm,
what's
mhm.
underneath it?
Right. Exactly, and this is it's so unique for everybody, right? Because I am certainly not saying that running can't be a form of self-care. It
Mhm.
absolutely can if it's something that uplifts you, if it's
Yes,
something that really does bring you some sort of joy, and it does maybe not even joy, maybe peace, right? Like, maybe it, aligns your nervous system, it brings everything down so that then you're able to go back into work and finish your day. Um, but in your case, right, it sounds like that's not what was happening at all.
exactly, and I
Yeah.
never ever got the runner's high, so I never benefited from
Mm.
that dopamine rush and that, it just never happened. I never got that, "Oh my god, I'm on top of the world, I could keep going forever." It was like, "Oh, thank god it's done."
So I'm curious,
Hmm.
uh, about that, and I know we have a lot to cover, but I'm just so curious, when did you, or maybe you didn't, maybe it's just you're reflecting on it now years later, but did that ever stop for you? Like, did you finally get to the point where you're like, "This sucks. I'm not gonna run during during lunch." Or did you
Um,
just continue to do it?
I at that time, I did continue to do it.
Okay.
And I think there were a lot of reasons why. I don't think I mean, maybe in my 40s, I haven't run for a very long time, and I know I got to a point where I just was like, "Why am I doing this? I hate this."
Mm,
Like,
mhm.
there's plenty of other forms of exercise
Right.
I actually enjoy.
Right, right.
Um, but at least now it is definitely more reflecting, and realizing kind of where things like, what place they had in my life and what purpose, as opposed
Mhm.
to, like, it really was purpose, it wasn't joy.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you for
Of
sharing
course.
that. Mhm. Is there anything else you want to add about this piece around, like, how this can develop?
I don't think so. I think at least all the things that kinda popped up for me, I covered.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that's coming up for me, to maybe add to this, and I think like we said, there are so many factors that could contribute to toxic productivity, and we're not hitting everyone by any means, but it's making me think about school. Like, it's making me think
Mm,
about, um, really, at least I think in this country, what we were taught at a very young age, right?
mhm,
Like, yes, I remember in grade school, we got, like, a 15-20 minute recess, and I think we had, like, a 20-minute lunch or something ridiculous. Like, if you really think about that even, that you only had that much time to eat.
right?
Um, a and but the whole focus, at least I know growing up for me in the public school system, was just on, like, your what could you produce? What kind of
Mhm,
results could you have? What can you w and, I don't remember being taught so much anyway, the importance of play, the importance of
mhm.
rest, the importance of creativity. I mean, certainly as a child, it's much more socially acceptable, right? But but I think my point here is that I, I think society teaches us
Yes.
that 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 toxic productivity can be worn as a badge of honor, and I really buck up against that idea.
Mm. It's so interesting you bring this up because I literally have never thought of it in this perspective, but as you were talking about grade school, I hated recess.
Hmm.
And I hated lunch. I hated the downtime because I was so much more comfortable
Oh,
being in school mode.
yep.
It was that like, that is where I was thriving.
Mhm.
Now, what's interesting as I'm saying this, so I'm an only child, and I loved my downtime outside of school.
Okay, okay.
Like, I mean, it was actually I would have preferred to stay home
Mhm,
and to play and to do whatever, whether it was with my friends or by myself. But when I was in school, I was there
mm,
to learn.
mhm,
Um, and it's very interesting because I never put this together until now. So that idea, I mean, and I can tell you from an educational standpoint, I went to public school probably for maybe up until 7th grade, and then I went to
mhm,
private school.
mhm,
And as far as even higher education, I had a pretty snobby attitude about it.
mhm.
Um, I There was a status symbol associated with a private college or
Right.
university, until I had to pay for my own. When I had to pay for my master's degree, it didn't matter. But
Right.
but even that, like, what was very interesting was there was always a plan. So that was, "All right, do your undergrad, then you're gonna get your MBA, and then whatever."
Mhm,
Well, when it came time to do that, I didn't want my MBA. I just,
Right.
and but I was like, "But I need a master's degree. I want a master's degree." I didn't care what it was in.
Mm-mm.
Thank God I love what I chose and what I now do.
Right, right.
But again, I think on some level, and I'm not sure I was aware of this, but that again speaks to that badge of honor
Yes.
and that, "Okay, look at me. I'm complete or I'm whole or because I've got these things. I've
Right.
accomplished these things."
Yeah, actually, it's what you're reminding me right now, the master's degree, you could put the running at lunch in that same category. It's almost like
Mm,
I'm doing this thing because I have this belief, right, that this could mean I'm worthy, or this could mean I'm somehow, honorable.
mhm.
And whether we're talking about running when you hate running, or whether we're talking about pursuing a master's degree when you don't really, if I was understanding you right, like, you don't really know, like, it didn't matter what it was in. It was just,
Right.
I've just gotta get this degree, and it reminds me of the running. It's like, I don't really like running, but that's not the point. I'm just
Exactly.
gonna yeah, so those
Yeah.
are really good examples.
Thanks.
Do you want to kinda transition into giving our listeners, some, and again, we're not gonna cover
Mm,
every single one, but what are some signs that you are
mm.
definitely either headed or fully in toxic productivity mode?
Wow, I think this is tied also to kind of like what the downsides are, right? Because I think
Mhm.
again, this
Yeah,
idea of, um, accomplishment, I think and I see this with my clients, a lot of anxiety, um,
yeah,
depression, burnout. Burnout is a huge one, whether
yeah,
that's physical burnout, emotional or mental burnout. Um, and I think probably the biggest one I see, think like if I were to kind of, categorize under anxiety and things like that, I find that some people have a really hard time sitting in silence or with even just being with themselves.
yeah,
If it's not chaotic, if it's not go,
right.
go, go, they don't know what to do.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that's a big one. A few that I would like to mention, and that was on my list as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, a few I would like to mention is, I think that what I see a lot in clients, that tend to lean into toxic productivity is, so they have an endless to-do list.
Mm,
Whether now this could be a physical list, or it could just be a mental list in our heads, right?
yep.
Now we all have to-do lists, don't get me wrong. That's not the problem. Like, I have to-do if I didn't have a list every day of just the things I know, at least work-wise, I needed to get done, um, my private practice wouldn't be nearly so successful, right? Like,
Mhm.
I would be forgetting things left and right. So it's not that you shouldn't have a to-do list, but where I see toxic productivity is that when we're not working on our to-do list, we feel stress, or like the anxiety that you just brought up a minute ago.
Yeah.
So that's where, like, if you have this list, this perpetual list, and when you're checking something off or you're in the middle of a task, you can kind of like, whew, okay. But if you're not doing that, you feel your stress go up, and you feel anxious. That, to
Yes.
me, that's a sign. That's a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I think tied to that is like, I guess maybe a bigger way of saying, like, if you check that box and you don't go, "Oh, nice," it's
Mhm.
when you start to look at your or you one, I think if you aren't able to see your successes,
Mhm.
but if you do see them and they feel empty or hollow, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
because it's like, okay, great, I did that. Now what?
Right, like, you're always looking for the next thing
Yes.
to
Yes.
accomplish.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed. And I think, it's interesting too when using some of the examples that we've talked about before, i- you mentioned like, maybe going out for a gentle walk just to walk. I mean, I think that's a big thing. And again, I think there's some self-reflection that needs to happen is, okay, am I doing things just to do them, to have fun, to
For the
if I'm
joy of it.
right, if everything I'm doing serves a purpose or checks
Mhm,
a box,
mhm.
um, that could be a problem. I mean, now granted, we go through periods where we don't have a choice. I mean, life happens,
Course. Yeah.
but if this is your norm and things like if someone says, "Hey, I'm having a party Friday night. I'd love for you to come over." And you're like, "Ugh, seriously? Like, I don't have time for that."
Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
that's a problem. You
Right,
know,
right.
now, again, granted, I'm not saying ipso facto it's a problem, but if if you look at engaging with friends or family as I don't have time for that. I've got other things that I have to do.
Right.
Okay, maybe it is time to look at that and slow down and be like, okay, well, you know what? Because this is where I think and I don't think again people see it because it can be that slippery slope
Yeah, yeah.
where toxic productivity really can impact relationships.
Yes.
And I think over time, people will stop. I mean, this sounds extreme, but they'll stop inviting you to things maybe because they're like, well, she never
Mhm,
comes. She's
mhm,
always
mhm.
busy. And I
Right,
think
right.
I think we use that excuse. We say, "Oh, I'm really busy." Well, make time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, can I add,
Yeah, sure.
make time if you want to do it. I
Yes,
I do
agreed.
wanna point out that, like,
Good point.
sometimes the going out at night, on a Friday might not like, that might not actually be what you want to do, but if you're yearning for connection, right? You're yearning, to see your friend or whatever, and you're not allowing yourself to do that, that's in my opinion, that's when it goes into that kind of harmful place.
No, I agree. And thank you for clarifying that because it's interesting what you just made me think of was and I think this was a few months ago. I think you and I had planned on a Sunday to record an episode
Oh, yep, yep.
and I had a friend that I hadn't seen in 30 years come
Mhm.
up to town, and I there was this part of me that felt badly, like, I really wanted to see her, and I totally knew you would understand. Um, but there was this part of me that's like, well, 1, I've made a commitment, which was to and I'm huge on my commitments, so I'm like, "Okay, I feel badly about that." The logical part of me knew Megan's gonna be fine with this, like,
Mhm.
she's really all about balance and relationship and all that. 3, I really want to see my friend, and it was just such an interesting process, and had I, 1, not talked to you about it or even thrown it out there, I could have really missed out
Right.
on a great experience with my friends because
Yeah.
I felt like I had to do this, it was work or
Right.
and not that I mean, I love doing this, I don't consider this work, but
Mhm.
it's so I think it's we have to take that time
Right.
to weigh it.
Right. And what if the reason why we do love doing this podcast is because we are giving ourselves that balance, right? Because imagine for a moment if 5 times in a row something came up like that you really wanted to do
Mhm.
and 5 times in a row you didn't do that thing because you felt like, "Oh, I have to do the podcast." I bet over time you wouldn't be liking the podcast as much.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
yeah,
And and I'd probably be pretty resentful.
right, exactly. Um, I wanna just add a few more that I think are
Mhm.
really important maybe for people to consider, like, do I do this?
Yeah.
So, and really, you've already mentioned this one that we I think a sign is when we see rest, play, creativity as a waste of our time. That's pretty
Mhm.
much what you had just said. Another one is, I think, when we think that our own self-care, right? So taking care of ourselves, whether physically, like maybe healthy habits, exercise, those kind of things. When we disregard self care physically, mentally, emotionally, because again, it's like, well, we don't have time, right? I hear this a lot from
Mhm.
clients that they want to take better care of themselves, but their lives have just gotten so busy that they can't fit time in, and maybe when we get to strategies, can bring up something that perhaps people wanna try, because I fully understand this idea of, "When the heck am I gonna" "I wanna go for an hour-long walk. When am I gonna find time to do that?" I understand it,
Mhm.
and I have a lot of empathy for it, but I know I've found ways. I have a pretty full life, and
Mhm.
it's pretty busy, and I have found ways to still put my self-care, right up there at the top. So anyway, that's just another sign that
Yes.
that I see, um, and I'm just gonna one more, and then I'll
Sure.
I'll stop, and I don't know if you have comments on any of those or if you wanna mention any others. But another one that I see a lot is that we are, another sign is that you're constantly overscheduling yourself.
Mm.
And I'm going to add that if you're a parent, you are also overscheduling your children.
Yes. Yes, I
I
see that a lot.
see, yeah, like I see it with clients that are super kind of type A, busy, 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 go, 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 and they have kids. Um, Man, sometimes I listen to these stories about how the household runs and like what kids are doing from early morning hours to 9, 10 o'clock at night. It's like,
Mhm.
whew, okay. Um, so so that I think can be another sign, right? And it's seen as normal, or it's seen as I think sometimes parents equate being a good parent with constantly having their kids do something,
Yes. Yes,
do
and
activities. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's that fine line too because it's especially I see this with families too where it's, well, my kid has to be well-rounded. So they have to play a sport, play an instrument, belong to this club. Um, I mean, there's so many things. And it was interesting. I had forgotten about this, but in preparing for this today, I had read an article and of course I don't remember what it is, but I might be able to find it. It was the example was these parents decided they were going to incorporate not just more downtime for themselves as individuals, but as a family. They wanted this to be a
Mm,
family thing.
yeah.
So they told their kids, you can only participate in one sport
Mhm.
per
Mhm.
season.
Yep.
And it didn't go over well at first. It was, well, all my
Mhm.
friends are doing this one and this one
Mhm.
and this one. But, and then the next question was kind of like, well, okay, fine. But what are we going to do with our time then?
Mhm.
And it was very interesting in the article because it says, well, we're going to have family time. And that family time could look like playing a game. It might
Right.
mean that we sit in the living room and we all read. Because I think one of the children asked, like, well, oh, does this mean we're going to get to watch this show? And they're like, no.
Right, right.
So it was very interesting to see the example of it being drilled down,
Yes.
which I really liked.
Yeah, and what you're talking about right now, that might be a good transition into us talking about strategies, because that is one of the strategies I put on the list.
Mhm.
And this would be strategies about how to begin to shift that balance, right? To find that good middle ground
Mhm.
of being productive. And that is one of the strategies on my list is to really pay attention to this idea of multitasking.
Mm.
Um, and because again, I think in our society anyway, that's like revered, like,
Yes.
oh, I can juggle 5 things at once. And it's a very powerful practice to be mindful about just trying it even as an experiment. Like, I am really going to put all of my focus on one thing at a time.
Mhm.
And that in that article that you were just mentioning, that's kind of the idea I'm getting, right? It's like, nope, you can do one sport. Um, and it's just that's kind of like this foreign feeling, right?
Right.
For a lot of us. But yeah, so that I think that that can be if you're really looking to for strategies on how to to balance it out, I think that that's a good one.
I agree, and I think that kinda brings me to 2 that were on mine. I mean, what we're really
Mhm.
talking about essentially is slowing down,
Mhm.
and and I think that means a lot of things. It's slowing your body down, slowing your thoughts down, um, giving yourself I mean, I had this conversation with someone yesterday. I said, "What would be if you think of taking that pause,"
Mhm.
and the example was needing to respond to someone, about a work issue fairly quickly. And I said, "Okay, well, what happens if you don't immediately respond? If it's only 5 minutes,
Right. Right.
if you take an hour?" And I said, "Sure, that might be uncomfortable, but I think it allows you to," which I think is another strategy, which is to look at, "Okay, what am I feeling? And what are my biases? Am I valuing, again, this idea of productivity, of doing? Um, and why am I feeling like I have to be called to action? Why am I feeling like
Right.
I have to jump?"
Yeah, 100%. And, yeah, I have practicing
Mm,
stillness on my list too. And, I had added it this just feels like a good time to maybe to mention this. I had put in a quote that came from The Gifts of Imperfection, but I don't think it was a Brene Brown quote, so she
mhm.
was quoting it, and I'll be honest, I don't know who said this, but you can look in the book and find out if you're curious. But this is the quote, "Stillness is not about focusing on nothingness. It's about creating a clearing.
Mm,
It's opening up an emotionally cluttered space and allowing ourselves to feel and think and dream with question."
yes.
So that's pretty much what you were just talking about, right? And you can
Mhm.
even practice this with something as simple as I'm going to wait 5 minutes before I respond to this email.
Right,
And I'm gonna just sit for a minute and I'm just gonna be get centered, right? It doesn't mean you have to empty your mind of all thoughts, but I'm just gonna get centered and I'm going to maybe ask myself, going with your example, um, how do I want to respond to this person with awareness, right? With clarity, with honesty.
mhm,
And it, just that very simple practice, even if you do it for 5 minutes, I think can lead, right, to this idea of just balancing out our constant need to just respond immediately, go do this thing quickly, get this thing done.
right, right, and what that kinda makes me think of, I mean, one of my mantras is to really be curious,
Yes.
and and that ties into that, right? Because if you take that time and you slow things down and you ask yourself maybe some open-ended questions and asking yourself things like, "Okay, before I respond, what do I want to see happen? Who's gonna be involved? Who does this impact? And what are my options?" And I think it's interesting. I mean, an option, and we were saying this earlier, not in so many words, but again, we've said this, I think, probably in almost all of our episodes. It's okay to say no,
Yep.
and it's okay to say yes if it's something like you said earlier, if you want to do,
Right.
and maybe if it's fun,
Absolutely.
saying yes to the fun things.
Mhm. Mhm. Right, and, I think the fun and creativity in play is a whole another topic in and of itself, right?
Right.
That we really wanted to devote a whole episode to, um, because I think it deserves its own episode, especially for adults, right?
Yes.
Um, so I love that, and, um maybe that's a good lead into another strategy that I got from the Gifts of Imperfection. Um, Brene Brown talks about, so we all know what a to-do list is, but what about a joy and meaning list?
Mm.
And so she talks about spending some time making a list of things that brings you some sort of sense of uplift, of peace, of joy, right? So it doesn't always have to be something that, "Oh, this is so exciting, like, I'm so completely excited and passionate about this." It might just be something that brings you a sense of peace or just kind of
Mhm.
raises your vibration a little bit. Um, so for example, maybe it's, writing in my journal. Maybe it's, "Oh, I love, like, board game night with friends when we get together and do that. I love going on a long bike ride on the weekend." Whatever it is, like, you make this list of things that brings you uplift,
Mhm.
and she suggests then you compare it to your to-do list.
Mm.
And the difference in those 2 lists might be pretty jarring for people, like, maybe they hadn't really considered, um, like, is anything on your to-do list something that brings you uplift? Hopefully, right? But it might not be. And if your joy and meaning list is completely different from the to-do list that you focus on day in and day out, that's something you really wanna look at. And, so maybe a strategy there would be to ask yourself, "How can I prioritize at least one item on my joy and meaning list each day?"
Mm, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that reminds me of kind of essentially it's the self-care aspect. And I mean, I think if you were to have circles, that would be the intersection of self-care.
Mhm.
Because in a healthy way, like there's other ways too, but it was when you were just talking, it was very interesting because I think it's also about paying attention to the little things that bring you that kind of create that space and maybe that stillness. And I had 2 experiences last week where it's very interesting, like, I wasn't doing any of this on purpose,
Mhm.
but it was very profound in the moment. So, one, I was out with the dogs, and a storm was coming in, so I just happened to look up because I started watching the clouds, and I was watching how they were like, the different layers and the different colors and how they were melding together, and it was just
Mm.
so peaceful.
Yeah.
And then another time, I was sitting in our sitting room in my chair, which, faces a window, and it was very windy out, and I'm looking at these trees, and I'm watching them sway. I mean, and they're big trees, they're strong trees, and I'm watching them sway back and forth, and I was like, "Wow, look at that." It's calm. I mean, now, I didn't wanna be up in the top there, but it was calm, and I was really noticing the strength and flexibility
Mhm.
that the trees were, in their movement, and again, it just brought me I felt so grounded and just so at peace. Now, I wasn't searching for it.
Yep.
I I wasn't it wasn't on my joy list, it wasn't on my to-do list,
Mhm.
but I was like,
Mhm.
I certainly it struck me that I made a note that I was certainly grateful that I had that moment, and I was like, "Okay, I feel good
Right.
about this."
Yeah, and I love those both of those examples because they're perfect examples of, things that we can do and experience that I'm assuming that that didn't take you too long, right? Like, you can have these moments of peace and pause and let's call it non-doing,
Mhm.
where, right, you're kind of looking out at the trees and you're in awe, right?
Right.
And it's I find that those kind of moments might last less than a minute, but they can have a profound impact on, like, the rest of your day.
Yes.
So, I would push back a little bit. I would do it lovingly, but I'd push back on anyone who is listening saying, "I just don't have time."
Mm.
I literally don't have time to try to bring in some of these practices, but, do you have time to gaze out the window for a moment and really tune in with nature or whatever, right? There's a
Yep.
million ways you could practice that peace that can come with a pause.
Exactly. Exactly. That makes me think of 2 more, that are on my list,
Mhm.
and one is shutting off your electronics.
Yes.
Um, and I think it creates that space, like, if I think about when I was sitting looking at the trees, I mean, I don't think I was conscious of this at the time, but, I mean, I know I did not have my phone with me, and I will certainly do this when I take say, if I take a week off from work, I disable my email notifications on my phone so that I'm not
Mhm.
getting the bongs. I'm putting my phone goes on do not disturb at 7:30 every night automatically and doesn't come back on until 7 in the morning. Um, I will leave well, I don't do this now, um, but I used to when you and I worked together, I would leave that laptop in the office. As much as they wanted me to take that thing home, I would
Yep.
not. And I think the other big one I think that's important for me, to share is I think and this kind of we've talked a lot, I mean, we always talk about that idea of self-reflection and self-inquiry, but I think it's important for us to look at how do we define success, and do we need to reframe that? Because I think if we can look as an example, if we made a pie chart of all the things that are, you know, what's important to us, what are the different aspects of our lives, whether that's being a parent, a friend, a spouse, an employee, a community member, our spiritual selves, our financial selves. How balanced is all of that? And because I find that when things are maybe more equally distributed, we can look at things and say, okay, what in these areas are feeding my soul?
Right. Beautiful. I love that. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up here?
I think those are the big ones for me.
Mm. Yeah, no, I feel good about this list. Um, and I think that this is our so I've already kind of mentioned this, right? But so our next podcast episode, very connected to this, but we're really going to delve deep into the cultivating, the play, the rest, the
Yes.
creativity. So listeners, please stay tuned for that. We wish you well and take good care.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to share your thoughts or ideas with us, you can email us at TherapyUnpluggedPodcast@proton.me. Until next time, be sure to subscribe to Therapy Unplugged on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts.